A quiet morning, Jamie Harper stood in Gallery 7 of the Metropolitan Art Museum, adjusting the information placard beside a Monet painting. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting golden light across the polished marble floors. She had worked here for 3 years, and every morning felt the same. Peaceful, predictable, safe. Jamie preferred it that way. She was the kind of person who brought homemade sandwiches to work, wore comfortable flats instead of heels, and spent her lunch breaks reading poetry in the sculpture garden. Her coworkers often forgot she was there. She did not mind. Being invisible meant being safe from judgment, from disappointment, from all the things that had hurt her before. At exactly 9:30, her supervisor, Mr. Patterson, rushed past her with his usual morning coffee. "Jamie, we have a VIP tour coming in at 10. Make sure Gallery 7 is spotless." She nodded quietly, already reaching for her cleaning cloth. Mr. Patterson never looked at her when he spoke. Most people did not. The arrival at 10 o'clock sharp, the main entrance doors opened with a gentle whoosh. Jamie was arranging fresh flowers near the Impressionist collection when she heard voices echoing through the marble hallway. Male voices, confident and loud, discussing stock prices and business deals. Then she saw them. A group of men in expensive suits walked through the museum like they owned it. In the center of the group was a man who stood taller than the rest. He had dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Blake Donovan. Jamie recognized him from the newspaper. Tech entrepreneur, philanthropist, billionaire. The kind of man who lived in a completely different world. But it was not Blake who caught Jamie's attention. It was the elderly woman in the wheelchair beside him. She wore a lavender dress with pearl buttons, and her silver hair was styled in soft waves. Her hands rested gently on the armrests of her wheelchair, and her eyes held a quiet sadness. Ruth Donovan, Blake's grandmother. Jamie had read about her once in an article about the Donovan family. Ruth had been a talented painter in her youth, but a tragic accident had left her deaf at age 40. The dismissal, Mr. Patterson appeared beside Blake, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "Mr. Donovan, welcome to the Metropolitan. We are honored to have you here. Let me show you our newest acquisition." Blake nodded politely, but his attention was on his grandmother. Ruth was looking around the gallery with longing in her eyes, clearly wanting to engage with the art, but no one was speaking to her. No one was even looking at her. One of the younger museum assistants, a woman named Trish, whispered to another staff member, just loud enough for Jamie to hear. Why did he bring her? It is not like she can understand anything about the art. The other assistant laughed quietly. Just smile and nod. She will not know the difference. Jamie felt something tighten in her chest. Anger, sadness, disappointment. She had spent the last 2 years learning American Sign Language at the community center every Thursday night. She had learned it because her little cousin Danny was deaf, and she wanted to communicate with him properly. She had learned it because she believed everyone deserved to be heard. Even in silence, the gesture without thinking, Jamie set down her cleaning cloth and walked towards Wheel's wheelchair. The businessmen were still talking loudly about profit margins. Mr. Patterson was gesturing dramatically toward a painting. No one noticed Jamie approach. She knelt down beside Ruth's wheelchair, making sure she was at eye level. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, Jamie signed a greeting. "Good morning, Mrs. Donovan. Welcome to the Metropolitan Art Museum. My name is Jamie. I hope you enjoy the beautiful art today." Ruth's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly in surprise. Then, slowly, a radiant smile spread across her face. Her hands lifted from the armrests, and she signed back with trembling fingers. "You know sign language." "No one here knows sign language." "Thank you. Thank you so much." The room fell silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Mr. Patterson froze. The assistants stared, and Blake Donovan turned around slowly, his sharp eyes fixed on Jamie with an intensity that made her heart skip. The recognition, Blake walked toward them, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Jamie stood up quickly, suddenly aware that she had just interrupted a VIP tour. Her cheeks flushed. She looked down at her worn flats, wishing she could disappear. But then Blake spoke, and his voice was different from what she expected. It was warm, curious, almost gentle. "What did you say to her?" Jamie swallowed hard. "I just welcomed her to the museum, sir. I told her I hoped she would enjoy the art." Blake looked at his grandmother, who was still smiling, her eyes bright with tears. Ruth signed something quickly, her hands moving with emotion. Blake did not understand sign language, but he could read his grandmother's face. She was happy. Truly happy. For the first time in months, Blake turned back to Jamie. "Can you translate for me?" Jamie nodded. She said that no one has spoken to her like that in a very long time. She said most people talk around her, not to her. She said you are very kind. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the gallery. He smiled, not a polite business smile, but a real one. "Would you be willing to give us a private tour? I would like my grandmother to actually experience the art, not just look at it." Mr. Patterson stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Donovan, I assure you, I can provide the best tour in the city." Blake did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Jamie. "Can you do it?" Jamie hesitated. She was just a guide. She had never given a private tour to someone like Blake Donovan. But when she looked at Ruth, who was watching her with hopeful eyes, she could not say no. "Yes, I can do it." The private tour for the next hour, Jamie guided Blake and Ruth through the museum's most beautiful galleries. She spoke to Ruth in sign language, describing each painting in detail. She explained the brushstrokes, the color choices, the emotions behind each piece. Ruth listened with complete attention, asking questions, sharing her own thoughts. Blake walked beside them, watching Jamie with growing fascination. She was not like anyone he had met before. She was gentle, thoughtful, completely genuine. She did not try to impress him. She did not flirt or giggle or drop hints about her availability. She simply focused on making his grandmother happy. When they reached the Impressionist gallery, Ruth stopped in front of a Renoir painting. She signed something slowly, her hands moving with reverence. Jamie translated, "She says this painting reminds her of her youth. She used to paint in this style before the accident." Blake looked at his grandmother with surprise. "I did not know that." Ruth signed again, and Jamie translated. "She says you were too young to remember. She stopped painting after she lost her hearing. She thought no one would take her seriously anymore." Blake knelt down beside his grandmother's wheelchair. "Grandmother, I did not know you felt that way." Ruth touched his cheek gently, then turned back to Jamie and signed something private. Jamie's eyes softened. "She says you are a good man, but you work too much. She worries about you." Blake laughed quietly. "She is right about that." The interruption just then, the sound of high heels clicking on marble, interrupted the moment. A woman in a sharp black business suit walked into the gallery, her expression cold and calculated. Candace Wright, Blake's business partner. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, red lipstick, and eyes that assessed everything like a predator. "Blake, there you are. We have the investment meeting in 20 minutes. We need to leave now." Her gaze flickered to Jamie dismissively, then to Ruth with barely concealed impatience. "I hope this little museum trip was worth delaying our entire schedule." Blake stood up slowly. "Candace, this is Jamie Harper. She has been giving my grandmother a wonderful tour." Candace's smile was sharp. "How nice. I am sure she is very good at her job." The word sounded like a compliment, but the tone was pure ice. Jamie recognized that tone. She had heard it before from people who thought kindness was weakness. Ruth signed something quickly to Jamie. Jamie hesitated, then translated. "She says she wants to come back next week. She wants me to show her more paintings." Candace laughed, a brittle sound. "Blake, surely you can hire a professional art consultant if your grandmother wants tours." Blake ignored her completely. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Jamie. "My direct number. Please call me when you are available next week. Name your price." Jamie took the card with trembling fingers. "I do not need payment, Mr. Donovan. I would be happy to spend time with Mrs. Donovan." Blake looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Then perhaps you will let me buy you coffee sometime." As a thank you, Candace's eyes narrowed dangerously. Jamie felt the weight of that gaze, felt the unspoken warning. But when she looked at Ruth, who was smiling at her with such warmth and hope, Jamie made her decision. I would like that, Jamie said softly. The aftermath after Blake. Ruth and Candace left. The museum erupted in whispers. Mr. Patterson pulled Jamie aside, his face a mixture of confusion and calculation. What exactly did Blake Donovan say to you? Jamie held the business card carefully. He asked me to give his grandmother another tour next week. Trish appeared beside them, eyes wide. Did he really ask you out for coffee? Jamie said nothing. She simply walked back to Gallery 7, her heart pounding. She looked down at the business card. Blake Donovan, founder and CEO, Donovan Digital Solutions, written in pen at the bottom in elegant handwriting. Thank you for seeing her, Blake. That night, Jamie sat in her small apartment staring at the card on her kitchen table. Her best friend Grace called. Jamie, tell me everything. Jamie smiled, touching the card gently. I think something just changed, Grace. I do not know what it is yet, but something changed. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars. And for the first time in years, Jamie Harper felt like maybe, just maybe, being invisible was not her destiny after all. Maybe being seen by the right person was worth the risk. The business card sat on her table, promise of something she had never expected. Tomorrow, she would call. Tomorrow she would say yes to coffee. Tomorrow her quiet life would become something entirely different. And deep down, beneath all her fears and doubts, Jamie Harper was ready. The unexpected invitation 3 days after that first meeting, Jamie found a cream-colored envelope waiting for her at the museum's front desk. Her name was written in beautiful calligraphy across the front. Inside was a formal invitation printed on textured paper that felt expensive between her fingers. You were cordially invited to the Ruth Donovan Art Exhibition, a retrospective of works from 1970 to 1985. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, the Donovan Gallery, 5th Avenue. At the bottom, written in pen, was a personal note. Please come. My grandmother specifically asked for you. She has something she wants to show you. Blake. Jamie's hands trembled slightly as she read it again. Grace practically screamed when Jamie called her during lunch break. Jamie Harper, you are going to that exhibition if I have to drag you there myself. This is like something out of a movie. Jamie laughed nervously. It is just an art exhibition, Grace. I work at a museum. I go to exhibitions all the time, not ones where billionaires personally invite you, Grace countered. What are you going to wear? That question haunted Jamie for the next 3 days. She did not own anything fancy enough for a gallery opening on 5th Avenue. Finally, Grace took her shopping and helped her pick out a simple navy dress with a modest neckline and elegant lines. It's nothing too flashy, but beautiful in its simplicity. The exhibition's Saturday evening arrived with a mixture of rain and city lights. Jamie stood outside the Donovan Gallery, watching well-dressed people stream through the elegant glass doors. She almost turned around 3 times, but then she thought of Ruth's smile, and she walked inside. The gallery was stunning. White walls, perfect lighting, and paintings that took her breath away. Ruth's work was extraordinary. Landscapes full of light and emotion, portraits that seemed to look right into your soul, still life paintings that made ordinary objects look magical. Jamie moved through the gallery slowly, studying each piece with genuine appreciation. She painted these all before the accident. Blake's voice came from behind her. Jamie turned to find him standing there in a charcoal suit, no tie, looking more relaxed than he had at the museum. After she lost her hearing, she stopped. She said she could not hear the colors anymore. I never understood what she meant until recently. Jamie signed the words as she spoke, knowing Ruth might be nearby. Color has a frequency, a vibration. Oh, maybe she meant she could not feel that vibration the same way anymore. Blake's eyes softened. That is exactly what she meant. I wish I had understood years ago. Ruth appeared then, moving through the crowd in her wheelchair, wearing a stunning emerald dress. When she saw Jamie, her face lit up completely. She signed rapidly, and Blake laughed. She says you look beautiful. She also says I should stop monopolizing your attention and let her talk to you properly. For the next hour, Jamie and Ruth communicated in sign language, discussing each painting in detail. Ruth shared stories about her inspiration, her techniques, her dreams from long ago. Other guests watched with curiosity. Some whispered. Most ignored them completely, which suited Jamie fine. The poisoned Candace Wright watched from across the gallery, a champagne glass in her hand and fury in her eyes. She stood beside two prominent art collectors, speaking just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. It is quite clever, really. Blake is one of the city's most eligible bachelors. And that girl works at a museum making, what, $40,000 a year? Of course she would learn sign language and befriend his grandmother. It is the oldest strategy in the book. One of the collectors, a woman named Mrs. Blackwell, raised her eyebrows. Are you suggesting she is manipulating Mr. Donovan? Candace took a delicate sip of champagne. I am not suggesting anything. I am simply observing patterns. Blake has always had a soft spot for sob stories. And this girl appears at exactly the right moment, knowing exactly the right skill to impress him. The timing is suspicious. The word spread through the gallery like ripples in water. By the time the exhibition reached its halfway point, the guests were whispering about the mysterious museum girl who was clearly chasing Blake Donovan's fortune. Jamie felt the stares, heard the whispers, her cheeks burned. She was about to excuse herself quietly and leave when Blake's voice cut through the crowd like a knife. The defense, excuse me. Everyone, may I have your attention, please? Blake stood. On the small platform near the gallery entrance, his voice calm, but carrying absolute authority. The room fell silent immediately. I want to address something that has been circulating this evening. There seems to be confusion about Miss Jamie Harper's presence here tonight. She wanted to disappear, Blake continued, his gaze sweeping the room. Jamie Harper is here because my grandmother personally invited her. She is here because she showed my grandmother more kindness and respect in 1 hour than most people have shown her in years. She is here because she is a genuinely good person, which apparently is so rare these days that some people cannot recognize it when they see it. He paused, then looked directly at Candace. If anyone has questions about Jamie's character or intentions, you can address them to me directly. Otherwise, I suggest we focus on celebrating my grandmother's remarkable artwork instead of spreading gossip. The silence that followed was deafening. Candace's face went pale, then red. Mrs. Blackwell looked embarrassed. Other guests suddenly found their champagne glasses very interesting. Ruth signed something from her wheelchair. Blake smiled and translated aloud. My grandmother says that Jamie is the first person in 10 years who treated her like a complete human being instead of a problem to solve. She says if anyone should be honored tonight, it is Jamie, not her paintings. Jamie felt tears prick her eyes. She signed back to Ruth, "You honor me just by letting me know you." The invitation after the exhibition ended, Ruth insisted that Jamie join them for dinner. They went to a small Italian restaurant nearby, just the three of them. No bodyguards, no business partners, no crowds. Ruth ordered pasta with fresh tomatoes. Blake ordered risotto. Jamie ordered minestrone soup, the cheapest thing on the menu. Blake noticed and smiled gently. Jamie, please order what you actually want. This is my treat. Jamie hesitated, then ordered the mushroom ravioli she had been eyeing. Over dinner, Ruth signed an invitation. I want to paint again, but I want company. Will you come to my studio every Sunday afternoon? We can paint together. Jamie's eyes widened. Mrs. Donovan, I am not a painter. I would not know where to start. Ruth signed back, neither do I anymore. We can learn together, Blake translated, then added his own words. My grandmother has not touched a paintbrush in 30 years. If you can help her find that part of herself again, it would mean everything to me. Jamie looked at Ruth's hopeful face and knew she could not refuse. I would be honored. The coffee shop confession the following Tuesday, Blake called Jamie's cell phone. Are you free for that coffee I promised you? They met at a small cafe near the museum. Nothing fancy. Just good coffee in quiet corners. Blake ordered black coffee. Jamie ordered chamomile tea with honey. They sat by the window, watching the city rush past outside. Tell me about you, Blake said. I have been doing all the talking about my family. But I do not know anything about yours. Jamie wrapped her hands around her warm cup. There is not much to tell. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. My mother left when I was 8. My father worked 3 jobs and still could barely keep the lights on. I raised myself mostly. Blake's expression softened. That must have been difficult. It taught me to be invisible, Jamie said quietly. If I was quiet enough, small enough, undemanding enough, maybe people would not leave. Maybe I would not be a burden. You could never be a burden, Blake said firmly. Jamie smiled sadly. You say that now, but you do not know me yet. Then let me know you, he replied. Let me decide for myself. The shared pain Blake told her about his parents then. How they died in a helicopter accident when he was 19. How he inherited everything overnight. The company, the responsibility, the pressure. I never got to be young, he said. I went from college student to CEO in one day. My grandmother was the only person who understood. She had lost her husband young too. She knew what it felt like to have your whole life change in an instant. Jamie reached across the table and touched his hand gently. You did not get to grieve, no, Blake admitted. I had to be strong. Had to keep the company running. Had to prove I could handle it. He looked at her hand on his. You are the first person in years who has looked at me and seen someone who might need comfort instead of someone who can provide it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Blake did not pull his hand away. Neither did Jamie. The warning when Jamie returned to her apartment that evening, she found something slipped under her door. A plain white envelope, no name, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with words cut out from magazines like an old ransom note. Stay away from Blake Donovan. You do not belong in his world. This is your only warning. Jamie's hand shook as she held the note. She wanted to dismiss it as a joke, but the threatening tone was clear. Someone was watching her. Someone wanted her gone. Grace came over immediately when Jamie called. You need to tell Blake about this. And say what? Jamie asked. That someone is threatening me because I had coffee with him. It sounds ridiculous. Sounds dangerous, Grace corrected. Jamie, these are rich people. They play by different rules. You need to be careful. But the next morning when Blake called and asked if Jamie wanted to visit Ruth's studio that Sunday, Jamie said yes anyway. She was not going to let fear steal something good from her life. Not this time. The studio, Ruth's art studio, was located in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. High ceilings, enormous windows, and the smell of old paint and turpentine. Ruth had not been there in decades. Blake had it cleaned and restocked with fresh supplies. When Jamie arrived Sunday afternoon, Ruth was already there, sitting in front of a blank canvas, a paintbrush in her trembling hand. She signed to Jamie, I am terrified. Jamie sat beside her and picked up her own brush. Then let us be terrified together. Ruth created abstract swirls of color. Jamie painted a simple landscape that looked like a child's drawing. But they laughed, and they created, and they were happy. Blake arrived near the end with sandwiches and lemonade. He watched them paint with something like wonder in his eyes. When Ruth finally set down her brush, exhausted but smiling, Blake signed to her clumsily. I am proud of you. Ruth laughed at his terrible signing, but her eyes filled with tears. She had not heard those words, seen those words. And far too long, the question as Jamie was leaving the studio, Blake walked her to her car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Brooklyn streets. Blake stopped her before she could open her door. Jamie, I need to ask you something. She turned to face him, heart pounding. Okay, this thing between us, whatever it is becoming, it is real for me. I need to know if it is real for you too. Because if it is not, if you are just being kind because of my grandmother, I need to know now before I fall any further. Jamie looked up at him, at his honest eyes and vulnerable expression. She thought about the threatening note hidden in her drawer. She thought about Candace's poisonous words. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then she thought about Ruth's smile, about Blake's gentle touch, about the way her heart felt lighter when she was with them. It is real for me too, she whispered. Blake exhaled like he had been holding his breath for days. Then have dinner with me. A real date. Just the two of us, Jamie smiled. When? Tonight, Blake said. Right now. Unless you have plans? Jamie laughed. My plans were leftover soup and a Netflix documentary. Then let me offer you something better, Blake said, taking her hand. Let me offer you the beginning of something neither of us expected. And standing there in the fading Brooklyn sunlight, Jamie Harper realized that being seen was not scary at all. It was the most beautiful feeling in the world. The date Blake took Jamie to a rooftop restaurant with a view of the entire city. Not pretentious, just beautiful. They ate pasta and shared tiramisu. They talked about books and childhood dreams and the things that scared them most. Blake admitted he was terrified of failing his grandmother. Jamie admitted she was terrified of not being enough. Enough for what? Blake asked. For this, Jamie said, gesturing between them. For someone like you? Blake reached across the table and took both her hands. Jamie Harper, you are enough. You have always been enough. The problem is that the world trained you to believe otherwise. Those words broke something open inside her. Jamie felt tears slide down her cheeks, and she did not try to hide them. Blake handed her his cloth napkin and did not look away. He stayed present with her pain, which somehow made it hurt less. When they left the restaurant, Blake did not kiss her. He simply held her hand as they walked through the city streets, and that felt like enough. More than enough, the scheme exposed, Monday morning arrived with chaos. Jamie walked into the museum to find Mr. Patterson waiting with a grim expression. Ms. Harper, we need to talk in my office immediately. Jamie's stomach dropped. Inside his office, Candace Wright sat in the guest chair. Looking perfectly composed, Mr. Patterson gestured for Jamie to sit. Miss Harper, Miss Wright has brought some concerning information to my attention. She claims you have been using museum resources to stalk the Donovan family. She has phone records showing you called Blake Donovan's office multiple times last week. That is not true. Blake called me. I never called his office. Candace smiled coldly. I have the records right here. 5 calls from the museum's main line to Donovan Digital Solutions. All during business hours when you were working. Jamie felt panic rising. I did not make those calls. Someone did, Mr. Patterson said sternly. Using museum equipment for personal business is grounds for termination. But then Jamie remembered something. Wait, check the exact times of those calls. I can prove I was giving tours when those calls were made. The museum has security footage and tour logs. Mr. Patterson pulled up the records. Candace's expression flickered for just a second, and that is when Jamie understood. You made those calls. You called Blake's office pretending to be me? Candace stood up quickly. That is absurd. Why would I do that? To get me fired, Jamie said quietly. To remove me from Blake's life. Mr. Patterson checked the security footage. Sure enough, at the exact times of the calls, Jamie was visible in Gallery 5, giving a tour to a school group. She could not have made those calls, but the footage showed something else too. Candace Wright, entering the museum staff area. Candace near the phone system. Candace leaving quickly. Mr. Patterson's face went dark. Miss Wright, I think you should leave. Now. The hospital that afternoon, Blake called Jamie with panic in his voice. It is my grandmother. She collapsed at home. They took her to Presbyterian Hospital. Can you come? Jamie left work immediately and rushed to the hospital. She found Blake in the waiting room, his perfect composure completely shattered. His hair was messy from running his hands through it. His eyes were red. They say it was a stroke, he said hoarsely. A minor one, but still. She is stable. But Jamie, if I lose her too? Jamie wrapped her arms around him. You are not going to lose her. Ruth is strong. They sat together for hours. Jamie did not leave his side. She brought him coffee. He did not drink. She held his hand when the doctors gave updates. She simply stayed. When they finally allowed visitors, Ruth was awake, but tired. She smiled weakly when she saw Jamie. Her signing was slower now, more careful. You came. Of course I came, Jamie signed back. You are important to me. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She signed to Blake, who was standing by the door. Blake translated aloud. She says she prayed for someone like you to come into my life. She says she can rest now, because she knows I will not be alone.
Wow.
Jamie's throat tightened. Mrs. Donovan, you are going to be fine. You are going to paint again. We have so many more Sundays ahead of us. Ruth smiled and closed her eyes. exhausted but peaceful. The confession in the hospital hallway. Blake and Jamie stood by the windows overlooking the city. Blake spoke first. I realized something today while I was sitting in that waiting room, terrified. I realized that life is too short to pretend we do not feel things we clearly feel. Jamie turned to look at him. Blake, what are you saying? He faced her fully. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Jamie Harper. Completely, utterly, inconveniently in love with you. And I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know this is fast, and I know we come from different worlds. But none of that matters to me anymore. All that matters is that when my grandmother was in that emergency room, the only person I wanted beside me was you. Jamie felt her heart expand in her chest. Blake, I love you too. I have been terrified to say it. Terrified that this is temporary, that I am going to wake up and find out it was all a dream. Then let me prove it is real, Blake said, pulling her close.